Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. I'm Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. For more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together researchers with experience in the federal government to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our HEROES fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. During the webinar, we invite you to use the Q&A tool to ask questions. The webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will be added to the QEM network and granted access to the Resource Hub. And I am so happy and proud to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Toni Danstedt uses her PhD in systems science and developmental psychology to advance equitable, informal STEM learning research and practice. Toni has led over 100 research and evaluation studies in collaboration with brilliant practitioners, academics, artists, and community members. Her work has explored the impacts of informal learning for people of all ages and has spanned topics including social justice, metacognition, spatial reasoning, and environmental and social science. With deep applied research methods and design expertise, Toni has experience as a primary investigator and lead researcher, an evaluation consultant, and a program officer for STEM education funding programs. Dr. Naomi Hall Byers is a social psychologist whose work examines social, cultural, and contextual factors that drive health and educational inequities among historically marginalized groups. She also studies identity development and the phenomenon of shifting among Black women in STEM. For 16 years, she was a professor of psychological sciences at Winston-Salem State University, where she directed the Race, Culture, and Context Lab. She previously served as a program director and acting deputy division director in the Social and Economic Sciences Division of the Directorate for Social Behavior and Economic Sciences at the National Science Foundation. Dr. Hall Byers holds a PhD in applied psychology and an MPH in maternal and child health, with expertise in social and behavioral sciences, mixed methods, and evaluation. And Dr. Tori Rolak-Smith is an educator whose career spans more than 2 decades in higher education and government. As a faculty member and director of undergraduate studies in what was formerly the College of Engineering, Architecture, and Computer Sciences at Howard University, she guided students and faculty in teaching and learning, advising, research, recruitment, and corporate engagement. In government, Tori was lead program director for the National Science Foundation's Eddie Bernice Johnson Includes initiatives, and program director for the Historically Black Colleges and Universities undergraduate program and the Faculty Early Career Development program. Her efforts focused on providing funding and support for undergraduate education, research, and large collaborative networks implementing systems-focused strategies that broaden participation in STEM. Tori is an engineer by training, with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Howard University and an MS and PhD in Civil Engineering from North Carolina State. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Toni.
So much, Christine and Tarina. And thank you all for being here. We're really excited to think with you about expanding research capacity through collaboration. Today's webinar includes information that's broadly applicable, but our emphasis will be on partnerships with higher education. And I call attention to that because our colleagues are conducting a 2-part series on K-12 partnerships, and we highly recommend those as well. Their first session was last week. It was incredibly informative, and you can find it in the repository under the Power and Practice of Building Collaborative K-12 Community Partnerships. So returning to today's session with Tori and Naomi, a quick disclaimer, we are former National Science Foundation program officers, and we no longer work there, but we might slip up and say we when we're talking about a program there, so just hold that in mind. That would just be out of habit. And we are not in any way speaking on behalf of the agency. So now let's begin today with a question. So in this poll, we want you to select all that apply. So which of these roles have you held in research projects? And Christine, I'll let you decide when we've got a sufficient number of responses.
We've still got some responses trickling in, so I'll let the poll continue for a few moments.
Perfect. Ooh, so we can see there's quite a lot of variety here, which is great. And we can also see that there are some roles that are less represented here, which is also great because that's an opportunity to build capacity. Thank you all so much. So these are a few of the essential roles for STEM education and behavioral science research projects. And it's really the combined knowledge, expertise, and experience of the people who fill these roles that create a powerful and successful research study. So as you may have noted from the poll, not all of these roles need to be separate people. Could pick multiples. So some researchers are also content experts and methodologists and are also members of the community. However, for any of the roles that are not your area of expertise or not currently part of your team, or even to get some variety in these areas of expertise, you do not need to learn it. You do not need to become a methodologist, and you do not need to fill it all in yourself. And in fact, trying to emulate these areas of expertise can really be detrimental to a proposal or a study because expertise takes time and brings a lot of nuanced understanding. And we've all, as program officers and as reviewers, we've all seen that it can be quite clear when that deep knowledge is missing. So one of the main ways to build research capacity is by developing, nurturing, and maintaining relationships across these roles. So that combined capacity is really where the magic lies. So our previous slide was about building capacity through relationships with individuals. And another way to build capacity is through partnerships with organizations. Organizational partnerships allow you to bring organizational level expertise, access, coordination, and contributions. So developing, nurturing, and maintaining relationships with organizations that impact your community and the communities you are working with can really help you identify where your shared goals and priorities are. And provided that you have aligned priorities and goals, organizational partnerships can really drastically help all parties increase capacity, improve impacts, and help and support research and learning at a much larger scale. So throughout this webinar, we'll be highlighting a few research projects that are funded through grants that require the work to center collaboration and authentic partnership. So our first project we found by exploring awards funded through the Spencer Foundation. They have a program that is Research Practice Partnerships, Collaborative Research for Educational Change. Nuestras Historias is a partnership between professional artists, community members, university researchers, informal learning educators, and museum experts. And the organizational partners are the Museo de las Americas in Denver, Colorado, University of Nebraska, Omaha, and the University of Colorado, Boulder. Nuestras Historias is an art exhibition and a research project. So each piece of art in the exhibition was co-created with youth, families, and professionals to offer perspectives on themes of identity, tradition, justice, playfulness, and much more. So it really is only through this collaboration, this organizational collaboration, where the researchers were able to embed the research within the exhibition development process. So that allowed researchers to design a study to understand how young people develop their identities as they create art about their own experiences, ancestral histories, and family stories. Equally, through this collaboration, the museum field is able to build evidence for its important role in youth identity development and to also understand the impacts of new practices for exhibition development and the new ways that museums can collaborate with their visitors. So this is a really good example of a small, informal, out of school partnership as a highlight. So I'll pass it over to Naomi, sorry, who will continue to delve into the impacts of effective collaboration.
Thanks, Tony. So thinking about the benefits of effective collaboration, we see that it increases our capacity to do the work, the validity of the findings from the work, the impact that we can make with the work, and the sustainability of the efforts into the future. Also, I do want to note, if you attended the webinar about K through 12 partnerships, you might have heard Dr. Toya Frank talk about the importance of authentic partnerships. And so I do want to mention that here because it's important that collaborations or partnerships are not only effective, but they also are authentic. And authentic partnerships or collaborations are built on trust, mutual respect, shared values, and transparency. So effective collaborations can do all these things: increase capacity, the validity, the impact, and the sustainability through having more expertise available for the project, dedicated personnel, multiple perspectives, right? So thinking about great thinking partners and synergies between the areas. It can enhance productivity. It has shared facilities and even lower costs. And as 3 former program officers, we know firsthand that funders really think about this and strongly encourage collaboration for these and other reasons, but particularly these when we think about sort of the great thinking partners, the synergies, and the ability to have multiple disciplines and areas of expertise at the table for a project. So now you may notice that we're using partnership and collaboration interchangeably throughout the presentation. And while they are similar, we do want to note that there may be slight differences in how they're operationalized in some settings. So we know that collaborations work together toward a common goal, but some may see partnerships as maybe a little more formal and having an underlying relationship or stronger connection between the parties. And so I just wanted to make that note that we are using them interchangeably, but that we do understand in some areas, in some settings, there may be some minor differences in terms of how they're operationalized and how they're utilized. Right now, I do want to draw your attention to examples of funding announcements that require or strongly encourage collaborations. The first 2 are federal opportunities. So the first one is from the National Science Foundation, and it's advanced technological education. And I did put a due date here. So it's October 2026 deadline if you're interested in this particular funding opportunity. It is funded in the STEM education or the EDU directorate. And so this particular funding opportunity supports partnerships between 2-year institutions of higher education and other entities with the goal of improving the education of technicians in science and engineering. So this award or this funding opportunity supports curriculum development, professional development, and career pathway development, including some other activities around applied research projects. But the goal is to advance the knowledge base related to technician education. Also, really quickly, something to note again from the K through 12 partnership was some sage advice from Dr. Joseph Isaacs, who reminded us of the importance of all partners, right? So we don't want to tokenize smaller voices like those of community organizations or smaller institutions like liberal arts colleges or community colleges. So this is one of the main reasons why we also wanted to highlight this opportunity, and for you to keep in mind that smaller doesn't mean insignificant. Our next opportunity is from the National Institutes of Health, or NIH. It's the Collaborative Program Grant for Multidisciplinary Teams. And this program has a January 2027 deadline. This particular program supports highly integrated teams of investigators working together to address a single, focused, ambitious, and challenging project that could not be addressed by individual research projects or one particular area or discipline. So in this particular funding opportunity, it really requires a synergistic interaction of multiple investigators with complementary expertise to achieve the team's research objectives. So teams are encouraged to consider far-reaching objectives that will produce major advances in their fields. And if anyone on this webinar is interested in either of these opportunities, we strongly encourage you to reach out to the program officer or the director identifying the funding opportunities. So we also wanted to provide an example from philanthropy. So if you're not familiar with the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, it is an independent private foundation located in North Carolina. Its mission is to serve and strengthen society by nurturing diverse groups of leaders in biomedical sciences with the goal of improving human health through education and discovery in areas of great needs. They have a climate change and human health seed grant with July 2026 deadline. This particular funding opportunity aims to stimulate the growth of new connections between thinkers working in largely disconnected fields, who together may change the course of climate change's impact on human health. So this opportunity is really interested in activities that build connections between basic and early biomedical scientific approaches and other fields, right? So they are also interested in proposals that pilot new approaches or interactions with the goal of reducing the impact of health centered activities, such as developing more sustainable systems in healthcare delivery and biomedical research. So if you're interested in this particular opportunity, two things to keep in mind. One, they fund beyond North Carolina, so you don't have to be in North Carolina to apply. Two, they really are looking for creative collaborations. So think a little bit outside of the box as you think about forming collaborations or partnerships for this particular opportunity. So as previously mentioned, collaborations can be large or small. I'm going to highlight an example of a small collaboration. And when I pass the mic to Tori, she's going to talk a little bit more about larger collaborations. The National Science Foundation has an agency-wide funding opportunity called the Mid-Career Advancement Program. And this program offers opportunities for mid-career scientists and engineers. And mid-career is defined as associate professor rank or equivalent to substantially enhance and advance their research program through synergistic and mutually beneficial partnerships. So the collaboration that I'm highlighting is called Towards a Theory of Engineering Identity Development and Persistence of Minoritized Students with Imposter Feelings, a longitudinal mixed method study of developmental network. It's a long title, but it is an award between two researchers at two universities in New York. And so the project aims to really advance the principal investigator's research agenda on developmental relationships as mechanisms for career advancement for women and people of color. So what the investigator wants to do in this particular project is undertake a new area of research, which is a requirement of the MCA funding opportunity. So they want to explore imposter syndrome among women and minoritized students in STEM. And so what the PI did was identify a collaborator at another institution with extensive experience in the areas in which they were interested in gaining new skills. So in this particular example, imposter syndrome and longitudinal latent growth curve analysis. And so what they were able to do is to form essentially a mentoring relationship. So one of the reasons that we thought it was important to highlight a small partnership such as this is for two reasons in particular. One, it shows the impact of a small but well-crafted and intentional partnership. And two, sometimes we don't often think about mentoring as a partnership, but an effective mentoring relationship is a strategic partnership. And so we want to encourage people that when we're thinking about collaborations or partnerships, everything doesn't have to be large. Some things can be small, very intentional, and very focused. So we have two questions that we would like to ask. So the very first question, and we'll give you about maybe 30 to 45 seconds or so. So using the meeting chat, please share one or more characteristics that made your partnerships beneficial. So we have clear communication, absolutely. Knowing and operating in their strengths, range of perspectives, right? So that diversity of thought coming to the table, respect, consistency, a common cause, mutual understanding of mission. Awesome. All right. So now we're going to ask you to switch gears just a little bit and think about one or more characteristics that made your partnerships unsuccessful. Disrespect, assumed shared goals, right, right. So not having clarity around goals, lack of shared values, lack of commitment, execution delays. Oh, that's an interesting one. Expecting too much too soon. Interesting. All right. So please feel free to continue to put um, anything in the chat, but just for time purposes, I'm going to go to the next slide. Um, so regardless of the number of collaborators or partners, a framework is important for structure and efficiency. So here, I just want to provide 4 examples of collaborative frameworks, but please know that there are many others. And so for these 4 examples, I will give a really brief overview, but I encourage you to do some research on collaborative frameworks if you're interested and figure out which may work best for you and what you want to accomplish. So the first one is collective impact. And so collective impact framework really emphasizes the importance of collaboration among various sectors. So like government, nonprofits, industry, communities. So really coming together to address complex social issues effectively. This particular model is built on the premise that no single organization can tackle these challenges alone. And so collective efforts are necessary to create sustainable change. And if you think about the funding opportunity from NIH that I mentioned, you might see that that could represent a collective impact or could utilize a collective impact framework. The second is called networked improvement communities. And this is where a group of stakeholders from diverse backgrounds come together to solve problems using tools of what's called improvement science. And specifically, yeah, I got it now, a 4-stage cycle, which is called PDSA, and which stands for Plan, Do, Study, and Act cycle. And so if that's something that's interesting to you, I would definitely suggest reading a little bit more about that. And I'll talk about some of the resources that we have for you as well. Research practice partnerships are normally long-term, mutually beneficial collaborations that promote the production and the use of research about problems of practice. So things in education, child welfare system, things of that nature. So it's the joint development of a research agenda that unites and the needs and the interests of both practitioners and researchers together to tackle the problems of practice. And the last is participatory action research, collaborative research approach that emphasizes community involvement in the research process to address social issues and empower marginalized groups. It really seeks to disrupt traditional power dynamics between researchers and participants by recognizing that communities have expertise, valuing their input, um, and that communities can identify their own needs and solutions. So PAR is really grounded in theories of change, and it really emphasizes collective reflection and action. So please note that there are key components or common principles across all of these frameworks. So what you'll see is the need for a common agenda, the celebration of diverse expertise, the use of evidence, the concept of shared power, and the integration and sustainability of the project. So since we're only providing a high-level overview of these frameworks, we did provide some resources and links at the end of the presentation for you to learn more about any one or all of these. So we did not leave you empty-handed. So Tori will talk about that in a bit, but I'm going to pass it to Tori now as she talks about larger collaborations.
Thanks, Naomi, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I want to continue to emphasize the importance of collaboration, really as a key component of lasting change efforts and all of the work that we do. We intend for there to be lasting change. So collaboration really is going to be key. And collaborative change is a really good framework, an example of a framework really that tends to be large scale partnerships with partners coming together with the aim of addressing a complex problem. So you've likely heard the term collaborative change. It's really broadly recognized, it's broadly used, and broadly applicable. What you see here are different definitions provided from different organizations, but what's interesting is they all sort of converge at that point in some of those principles that Naomi just mentioned. So it's about a collective purpose, a structured process, and really invaluable contributions from many different people and many different perspectives. So when we think about the work that we do, scientific proposals, whether that's STEM education or another STEM discipline, we're aiming to address complex, deeply entrenched challenges quite often. And so collaboration is going to be vital to bringing about that kind of change. More effective collaboration really does help to increase capacity because you have expertise available that you may not have otherwise. And because the impacts that you produce will now be the result of collective work and thereby be more or be farther reaching. So we're inviting you to consider collaborative change principles in the work that you do because it really does span a number of disciplines. What might it look like to implement a collaborative change effort in different disciplines? Here are just a few examples from disciplines like psychology, where you can see that the collaboration here is, for example, including families in the treatment of clients. So it's not only a reliance on the professional expertise of the clinicians, but it's also about the involvement of the families and those perspectives. In education, it might be a team that is collaborating with educators and administrators. That's not uncommon. Learners, also not uncommon, but also considering the caregivers and the community members or others who are really engaged in improving learning environments, improving the outcomes of learners and even the community outcomes. And even in business, collaborative change is a commonly used term and a framework to drive the work of business because you're talking about now collaborating with employees at large. So this might be at the highest levels of leadership or those that might not hold a leadership position at all, but all are given an opportunity to engage in decision making. So we just want to note that complex problems very much benefit from diverse multi-sector partnerships that are structured, and we can't emphasize enough the importance of those frameworks and structures for partnerships. And so our goal in this presentation is to provide recommendations to highlight examples and share resources, as Naomi mentioned, that can help you expand your research capacity and maximize your research impact through collaboration. So let's look now at an example of how that might operationalize as it relates to building collaborative infrastructure. So we'd all know infrastructure to be generally supports that are needed for a system to operate efficiently. I'm a transportation engineer, and so I think roadway systems. My husband is a software engineer. He might think more data infrastructure, but all of it's infrastructure. And when we talk about collaborative infrastructure, that's really a framework to structure authentic partnerships and support effective collaboration. And so the graphic that you see here illustrates one approach to collaborative infrastructure building that the National Science Foundation adopted for the Eddie Bernice Johnson Includes initiative. Now, this particular visualization of the NSF Includes model is credited to the NSF Includes Coordination Hub, but it provides a really good way of looking at how some of those principles that Naomi mentioned play out in a project. So this model is really based on collective impact principles, and it highlights first a common agenda, which you think about when Naomi mentioned that across all of those frameworks, both the four that we highlighted here, and then the many others that exist, having a common agenda is going to be key. Now, people refer to that differently. Here you see shared vision, and it's about engaging the community in both developing and implementing a shared vision. And that's a key difference from some other approaches where someone may come up with a vision and then try to get others to buy into that vision. But here it really is about together developing a shared vision from the multiple perspectives that would be represented on the team. And this is an approach that can be operationalized in many ways in research and within research teams and among different research teams. So something to keep in mind. Naomi mentioned diverse expertise, and here you see partnerships as a platform for that collaborative action, for engaging the multiple perspectives, and for leveraging collective expertise. Use of evidence was mentioned as a common theme across the frameworks. And here you see goals and metrics, which are really a platform for allowing evidence-based decision-making, which is especially applicable when you're making decisions about research directions and as you get information, as you get formative evaluation feedback, and as you start to see preliminary findings, how might that inform perhaps pivots or shifts in research direction? And it's important to take even a collaborative approach to that, especially when you're dealing with large scale partnerships and research among diverse teams. Shared power was mentioned previously. Here, that's represented as leadership and communication because it's really through distributed leadership, not a single source of power in the dynamic of the team, continuous communication, and really raising the visibility of the expertise of all of the collaborators. And so, in that way, power is shared as it relates to decision making and the direction of the research. And then lastly, Naomi mentioned integration and sustainability, and here you see expansion, sustainability, and scale, which really ensures that innovative approaches can extend beyond a single research project that you might be leading or working on, beyond a single campus, really beyond a single region, just ensuring that change is sustained and scaled up for the broadest possible reach. I can't move forward without also mentioning the importance of having a coordinating hub when you're working with large scale partnerships. We talked about how essential the structure is, and a coordinating hub can help to provide that structure. So the hub is really a group of people or organizations, people within organizations that help to ensure that the collaborative infrastructure is in place and running smoothly in support of whatever your project's goals might be. It is sometimes recommended that the coordinating hub be a unit that is not directly involved in the implementation of project activities, because that sort of independent, neutral perspective can be helpful. But hubs come in all shapes and sizes. The key really is their function. And so you see here a list of some of the key functions that a hub might provide in terms of facilitating connections. You might use online platforms or in-person opportunities to build community and engage the partners to build the kind of trust that would be typical for an authentic partnership. When we talk about expanding capacity, a hub could support learning through training courses or workshops. They might host convenings where community members and team members and partners can gather together and exchange ideas and expertise. In terms of using evidence, the hub could help to gather data from really a wide variety of partners, which can often be a challenge if you've ever tried to gather data across many partners, especially when you're trying to sort of coalesce around a common set of measures and implementing common or similar, really the same data collection instruments. That can be a challenge, and the hub can help in that way. It really helps to have these data to inform planning and action and assessment. And so it's another critical function of having a group like a hub to help structure large scale collaboration. When we talk about elevating expertise, the hub can help to raise the visibility of the publications and the individual expertise that comprises the entire collaboration. And they really can help facilitate sharing of resources among partners as well to help the work move forward. And then lastly, when we talk about advancing the field, it is a great function of a hub to support efforts toward sustainability of the essential elements of projects and really what progress looks like as research projects play out. So something to keep in mind, just generally, that hubs can help. They can help facilitate communication, resource sharing, capacity building, and engagement, all of which will lead to more effective collaboration. And we can't say it enough, thereby increased research capacity. So as another highlight, I wanted to make you aware of, if you aren't already, one network, which is the HBCU CHIPS network. It's an example of a large-scale partnership that really is working toward collaborative change. We want to note that these examples sort of illustrate concepts, but hopefully raise your awareness of projects that you might be able to connect with, or funding opportunities that you might be able to prepare and submit proposals for. Many of these are developing strategies that you might be able to connect with directly or adapt in your own research agenda. So just kind of keep that in mind as we move through the highlights, or even as you reflect on those already shared. So based on the HBCU CHIPS Network's fact sheet, which is available online, the network has already grown to 30 historically Black colleges and university partners. They are working and collaborating in areas of expertise that you see here on the map. And the font is incredibly small, but I promise if you go to the website, you can zoom in and see exactly what those areas of expertise are. But all of them are coming together really to advance semiconductor research and workforce development. To date, they have secured over $8 million in funding, with more proposals pending, and that number likely to become higher in the coming days, months, and years. That initial $8 million was provided from a variety of funding sources. So when you think about large scale partnerships, you might also think about how you might diversify funding streams and not necessarily have only a single funder or a single funding opportunity. The National Science Foundation provided funding for some of the planning, early integration, and preliminary research through the NSF Includes program and the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Undergraduate Program, or HBCU UP. But this network was also funded by NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the Department of Defense. They have funding from the Air Force Office of Scientific Research and from NIH. So again, think about how the work that you do might be applicable across a variety of different funding opportunities. Because even in addition to federal funding, this particular network lists over 25 collaborators that are industry collaborators on their website, and it includes companies like Boeing or Global Foundries, Intel, Micron, Google. There are a number of partners listed. Now, while the HBCU CHIPS network doesn't specifically call out a hub by name, it does provide leadership for this multifaceted, really multi-institutional network through what they call a governance board, which has diverse representation. So representation from HBCUs, from nonprofit organizations, from industry, and from the community. So it really helps to highlight how shared power and decision making can play out, how a team of professionals can be dedicated to ensuring that there's engagement and capacity building and visibility of, in this case, the partner schools, the faculty members, and their research, and other principles that are part of that collaborative infrastructure building or collaborative change process. So just an example of many that we could have highlighted of what it looks like to operationalize collaborative change, to build collaborative infrastructure, and to allow all of that to be in service to project goals being realized at larger scales. So we want to make sure we allow time for questions. We'll summarize here that our webinar title really presents both a question and an answer. So if the question is, how might an individual or an institution expand their research capacity, especially when resources might be extremely constrained? Today, we've really put forward one strategy in response to that question, and that is you can expand research capacity through effective collaboration. So the idea is, just as kind of a recap, that you want to build research teams that cover the essential roles. Expertise and capacity for the project is built through relationships, as Tony reminded us. And you don't have to be that expert. And certainly we don't want you to pretend to be that expert or present a proposal that doesn't include the requisite expertise for the work that you're doing. So build research teams that cover those essential roles, establish the partnerships to be able to do that. Secondly, you want to engage different types of organizations because each organization is really going to bring a unique and valuable perspective on the topic that you're addressing and strategies for how to go about addressing the work that you are looking to do. It will greatly enhance the capabilities of a project team to have multiple institutional or organizational perspectives represented. And so that's something that we strongly encourage, as we also encourage using a framework to structure the collaboration, really whether large or small. Some of these principles might relate specifically to large-scale partnerships, but even smaller partnerships or those one-on-one mentoring relationships, like Naomi called out, can benefit from an established framework to ensure that what is needed is in place to maximize effectiveness and efficiency based on rigorous studies and vast amount of evidence. These kinds of frameworks do help in making collaboration more effective and thereby building capacity. We talked about ensuring that collaborators align in establishing and working toward goals that they can both develop and work toward accomplishing together. You want to ensure that the partners agree to use evidence to inform approaches and decisions, and that partners share power so that no perspective is minimized or dismissed. We mentioned the benefits of a hub, so we invite you to consider that approach if you have a large-scale partnership. And we also wanted to highlight the importance of planning from the beginning for how the work will be institutionalized or otherwise sustained, and being able to mention that in a proposal that you might be developing. And lastly, we just want to close with the reminder that innovation and impact can increase with collaborations, especially when the collaboration is effective and structured and when the partnerships are authentic. So with that, here is that list of resources that we mentioned would come. I do want to note that we will discuss in more detail these frameworks in our, I believe it's the summer webinar, one of the summer webinars that this team will share. And the specific title that you would be looking for would be Research Methods with Community. Well, let me not say that. Maybe the title isn't completely finalized yet, but as you consider titles on the events page, it will allude in some way to research methods with community. So be on the lookout for that. Just know that this presentation will be shared in the QEM Resource Hub, which you'll have access to shortly after today's presentation. So all of these are clickable links that you'll have and be able to actually click them to learn more about these particular frameworks. But we also just want to reiterate the fact that there are others that you might look into to structure your collaboration. And then lastly, as a quick promo to that series I referenced, this team, plus one other partner who is not presenting with us today, will be doing a series of webinars. We started in February. Today's webinar on expanding capacity through collaboration is part of that. But moving forward, in April, we'll be looking specifically at how to establish a solid foundation for your research, focusing on literature reviews and how essential they are and the essential role that they play in proposals. And in May, we're going to be focusing specifically on research design and starting to look at how methodology and goals align to support research projects and specific lines of inquiry. And then looking ahead, summer, fall, winter, we've listed topics here that you might also consider given the work that you're doing. We want to put in one last plug for our colleagues' presentations because there is also the series that Tony mentioned earlier on the power and practice of building collaborative K-12 community partnerships. I know one took place last Thursday, and the next one I believe is planned for April 23rd. So keep that in mind because they mentioned plans to discuss things like co-design of research questions, data collection, and really navigating some of the power dynamics that we've alluded to today when you're in partnerships with the community specifically. So let me also invite you now as we think about collaboration and all of the things that factor into a successful research proposal. In past webinars, individuals have expressed interest in sharing their information with colleagues that might be part of the webinar today. And we know you can't see exactly who that is, but we do want to invite you, if you're interested in exploring potential collaborations with colleagues who might be in attendance, feel free to add your information to the chat, maybe your name and organization, an email address, and specifically a research area, because there might just be opportunity in this webinar that you're not aware of. But if you'd like to make your information available, others can see that and be able to respond in turn to navigate some possible connections. So with that, I thank you very much for your time and attention today. Our contact information is listed here. We do want to note that there's a QR code to the events page so that you can get information on upcoming webinars. There is also a QR code here to the Heroes webpage. In addition to facilitating webinars and presenting information in this format, all QEM fellows are available for office hours and they can discuss the ideas that you have or questions that you might have in far more detail. It doesn't even have to be a one-on-one. You might say, I want to meet Tori, Naomi, and Tony, and you can certainly reach out and try to schedule that kind of a session. So the QR code that's here for the Heroes page will give you more information about all of the fellows' areas of expertise so that you have a better idea of who you might contact given the focus of the research that you want to discuss. And then lastly, there's a QR code for a webinar feedback form. We'd certainly appreciate your perspectives because they can really help to inform future webinars. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Christine, and hopefully we have some questions or even thoughts that we might consider in discussion at this stage. I am going to stop sharing so that we can facilitate the Q&A. There we are.
Thank you so much for an enlightening and thorough presentation. There are some suggestions for resources in the chat right now, but I want to invite audience members to please ask questions in the Q&A box or raise your hand to be spotlighted and come off mute.
And just while people are putting their questions in, I just want to say how exciting it is to see people sharing in the chat their contact information and ways to find each other, because I think it is a huge piece of this, is just finding those relationships. So thank you all.
And we have a question from Gregory Davis.
Hello, all. Thank you for the talk. I've been part of many collaborations over the years. I have not really been part of a big collaboration from the ground up. And I wanted to think about how do you set up decision making in these collaborations? Because the ones I've been part of have had pretty significant documents that talk about elections and things like that. And so what's your philosophy on that? When you have a large group of people who are going to be working together, there are decisions to make, what office space to lease, what software to buy, who to hire, and lots of things. And you can't make every one of those decisions by democracy like they did in Athens. So I'm curious your thoughts.
I'm happy to start unless someone else wants to. Well, one of the key principles, I think, to that kind of collective approach, especially when you have a number of partners, is following some of those steps that we mentioned earlier. So when you talk about developing a shared vision with the partners, it allows everyone at the table to weigh in on what the work will be so that when you get to those more specific decisions, like you're saying, we need an office space to lease. Well, there could be some perspectives that leaving that decision making to a single individual or a single group of individuals with only a certain perspective from a certain position could be limiting. And so that same idea that we have around leveraging partners in a shared vision, we also promote that as a framework for effective collaboration to engage those partners in collective decision making. Now, it's not always democracy. I know we have all been part of teams where we have to either go the quantitative approach and say, majority rules and kind of go that route of almost voting, but more commonly, I think in these kinds of situations, it's allowing people to understand that every perspective will be considered and that decision making really is a function of the group. And that can operationalize in many different ways. But I'll just say that as a not necessarily a direct answer to how do we select office space when we have 27 people who might need to engage in that. But we have certainly seen examples of something similar where a space is selected that really doesn't represent the community of partners that are involved, where people would have access challenges. And so it really just highlights. And so thank you for that kind of an example, because it's a really great platform to highlight the power of collectivism, even in that kind of decision making approach. So I'll stop there because this has been my work for many years, and I'll talk the entire rest of the time. Tony, Naomi, anything to add there? No.
I'll just add, I think another piece is that part of the process of creating a collaborative partnership is collectively figuring out how you want to make decisions. So I think that is part of the explicit process of partnering, is not, like, it depends on the partners. It depends on the people who you are working with and what they want to have input on. Like, you don't want to waste people's time. People want to weigh in when they want to weigh in. And so really part of the initial partnership planning is talking about and being explicit about how decision making will happen and what to do when there are disagreements and split perspectives, so that that isn't in a heated moment, but in a big thinking moment. And then you also want to go back to those plans as things progress, right? Like, you don't want to be like, well, we set it in stone, this is who the decision maker is, nobody else gets to, like, you want to keep it's a partnership, it's a relationship, it's a continued rethinking and iterating to get better, even in the relationship part. Thanks, Gregory.
Excellent point, Tony. Thank you for adding that. I will just say, as a personal anecdote, when I first started in leadership, I wanted everything to be collective and collaborative, and so did the team. And then after a while, they were like, all right, we have contributed all we want to contribute. We need a faster way to get to a final answer, if you will. And so it is definitely something that should be revisited as time and activity pass and evolve. Thanks for that question, Greg. Any others?
You're welcome.
I have a question. This harkens back to Dr. Isaac Davis and Dr. Toya Frank's discussion last week about collaborative partnerships in the K through 12 context. I'm thinking right now about community partnerships and this tendency for some researchers to go into communities, extract knowledge, and not collaborate effectively with communities. I'm wondering now when you're forming collaborations and partnerships, if you have any advice for how investigators can train each other to approach communities as collaborative partners rather than sources of knowledge to extract or tokenize.
Question. As it relates to training the research team, I know there are numerous resources out there. Again, I'll just kick off by saying, just like we encourage use of an established framework, I would encourage use of the mounds of evidence and research that have been done in this space. So I would say don't try to create your own or, as is said, reinvent the wheel. There's a vast amount of research out there that can help to guide trainings where you're laying out fundamental principles, practices that can help research teams go about collaborations in the ways that are going to ensure that they are authentic and representative of the communities in which they're working. That's just kind of a general note to go to the research and leverage what's available. But Tony, Naomi, anything to add there?
I think one of the things that immediately came to mind, Christine, as you were saying, is when you're thinking about these academic community partnerships, right? When we were talking about tokenizing voices, right? And not assuming because an institution or a group is smaller that they're insignificant, because you're going to the community for a reason, right? You're going for their expertise and understanding that the community or the representatives in the community that you're working with most of the time are not academics, right? And so there has to be this, we've been talking about authentic partnerships. There has to be respect. You have to respect their process, the way in which they conceptualize their challenges, the way that they want to come to the table, because that's the purpose of bringing diverse, resources and spaces. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting, or really important, I should say, is being very clear on who the representative from the academic institution will be. It does not always have to be the PI, because sometimes the PI may not have or may not be interested in the type of rapport that you need to have to build trust and authentic partnerships with the community. So I think being really, honest and realistic about what is the goal of this particular collaboration or partnership and who might be the best representative, and then let that person, where you were talking about training, let that person bring information back to the research team and training them on this is how you engage with this particular organization or in the community. Because what has happened far too long, and I've been a part of both sides of those sort of academic community partnerships, is that the academic side sometimes doesn't think the community side needs certain things. Like, they don't consider the community side when you think about publications, right? They, may think about the community side only on the recruitment. And so I think training kind of goes both ways, right? Training the community organizations to be able to ask for things, or to be a part of things that they may not know that they can be, or it may not have initially been of interest to them, right? But, so having someone that really is focused to creating true authentic partnerships, being part of the conversation, I think on both sides. And I'll stop just because it's 1 o'clock. Because I'm like Tori, right? This is something I could talk about for a long time. But I'm gonna stop.
We can
Christine?
squeeze in one more question if we'd like. And we have a comment from Michael Spires. Depending on the community, you may need a longer run up to the collaboration. If you're working with, for example, Indigenous communities or other minoritized groups, you'll need to build trust first.
Absolutely. And I would argue we need to build trust first in any collaboration, but to Michael's point, in certain communities that is going to take longer than a single meeting. And so that's something that you want to plan for. And that's the kind of thing that the research definitely speaks to. So we want you to not just use evidence in carrying out the work, but even in conceiving and planning the work, because it absolutely suggests and supports practices just like what you described, Michael. So thank you for that. And thanks, everyone. I know we are slightly over time, but we really appreciate your engagement. Thank you to those who wanted to share their information in the chat. Feel free to note areas of expertise and potential collaborations that you might explore in your work moving forward.
Thank you so much to our participants today for engaging and working through an interactive webinar. This was so successful, and we really appreciate your attendance. And we hope you have a great afternoon, or if it's still morning where you are, a great morning.
Take care, everyone.